With the flowchart, it's much easier to show the key squares where white needs to put his king in order to help his pawn promote. So first of all, if we have a pawn on the second rank, or the fourth rank and below, we see that our key squares are simply these three squares, the squares that are two squares in front of the pawn, and of course not too far away from the pawn's file. Of course, if the pawn is no longer on the second rank, or the third rank, or the fourth rank, if it's the fifth rank or above, there's other key squares. Here, the key squares are these 6 squares. Remember that I said if the pawn is in front of the fifth rank, then the king, as long as it's in front of the pawn, we should be able to win. Once again, when I say in front of the pawn, this doesn't mean that the king can be on a6. If the king's on a6, then obviously black can actually come up and scoop the pawn up. So the king needs to be somewhere in front of the pawn in these 6 squares. Then we can guarantee that the side where the pawn is going to win. Just as a review, in this position, if white plays the move king to e6, then black can play something like king to f8. Since white is the opposition, he can force the pawn to promotion like this. So e6, then e7, and then e8. Likewise, if the king is 2 squares in front of the pawn here, it occupies one of the key squares here. So in this case, white must play the move e3. And if he plays king to f6, then now white can advance his king in front. So since white occupied one of the key squares, it doesn't matter who has opposition there. And now, later on, white is able to push his pawn towards promotion, getting this kind of position where white is opposition, his king's in front of the pawn. And in this position, white can win the game. Also, one short note here. When I give you the flowchart and everything, that only works if the pawn is from the B file to the G file. It does not work for the pawns on the rook files, the A file or the H file. Here's the reason for that. Theoretically, in this kind of position, white should be able to win because his king is so far in front of his pawn. You can play something like A3, and of course the king is in front of the pawn, and white is opposition. However, this time it doesn't really work. Because black can play king to B6, white used to be able to have his king be able to go to this square here on the left. However, this square actually falls off the board because it's just not, it doesn't exist. So white actually is forced to play king b4, and if black continues with king a6, there's actually no way to advance this king past black's king. So black's king can use these 2 squares here to blockade white's king, and white can never get past even if he does have opposition. So eventually white's forced to play a4, and this doesn't really work. Therefore, for rook pawns, the only way for white to promote his pawn is if he had this king on b7 or g7. If his king is on b7 or g7, then white is able to push his pawn to get promotion. Otherwise, if black can control b7 in any way, then the game will be drawn.